Matthew 7, beginning at 24. Great, thank you.
Okay. Right, Matthew 27, verse 24. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged, handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him, put a scarlet robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand. Then they knelt in front of him, mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spat on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall, but after tasting it, refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." And in the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." And immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar and put it on a staff and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city, appeared to many people. When the centurion and those who were with him, who were guarding Jesus, saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God."
You have that passage. It's Matthew chapter 27. What we've been doing in the last 6 weeks on Sunday mornings, we've been following the final week of Jesus' life, the final week of the most important man who ever lived. And each Sunday we've considered a passage from that day. So we started on the entry into Jerusalem on the Sunday. We've done the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday, Thursday, Gareth Williams from Bala last Sunday took Jesus in Gethsemane. We haven't looked exhaustively at everything that happened each day, but we've sought to kind of wind a path, and we're doing so because if we want to understand the beating heart of Christianity, what the gospel is all about, all four gospel writers squeeze us in. It's incredible the amount of words that are spent on the final week of Jesus' life. And as we work our way through to the Thursday and into the hours of that night into Friday morning, it is amazing just the space that is taken up in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John describing these moments. And I want us to look at one particular passage. I want us to go to the place outside Jerusalem this morning, the hill of Golgotha, literally the place of a skull. In Latin, that is translated as Calvary, which is why you hear Christians talking and singing hymns about Calvary. In the Jewish faith, executions, deaths were to take place outside of the camp of God's people. So here we are outside of the city, in the place of darkness and abandonment. Two sites, really, that people think Calvary could have been at. One, there's a church built on the site in Jerusalem, the Holy Sepulchre. There's a whole church built on this site. Underneath, archaeologists have found evidence that there was a quarry there. It would have been outside the walls of Jerusalem. The other place, called Gordon's Calvary, a chap thought he saw kind of in the side of a cliff the shape of a skull. Whatever place it was, a real place outside the walls of Jerusalem. A place you'd have to travel through a rubbish dump called Gehenna to get to. A place there were tombs, a bare, rocky place. Here we are, treading on the ground of Golgotha in this passage. I don't know if you've ever been on top of a very deep well or a mine shaft. I can remember a family holiday to Cornwall, and we were on top of these quarries on the Cornish coast, and there's a real deep shaft, and I can remember taking a stone. Have you ever done this? And you drop a stone and you wait and you wait and you wait to hear the splash, so you have some kind of idea how deep the well, how deep the depths are. And it can be quite kind of humbling when you kind of realize the kind of depths that there are under your feet. It makes your knees shake a little. It makes your legs buckle. We're so familiar, aren't we, with the cross? What I want to say to this morning, the cross is not just something you drop in to a gospel outline, something that we just say, oh, the cross happened so we can be forgiven. All the gospel writers take a lot of time to talk about the physical suffering, certainly Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the spiritual reality in John's gospel of what is happening. There are depths here under our feet, depths that we cannot be too familiar with, depths of suffering, depths of mystery, depths of love and wonder that should cause our knees to buckle. It is dizzying just what is happening here in this place called Golgotha, in this place called Calvary. Now, last week we looked at Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and we saw the contemplation of the cross as Jesus looked, as the shepherd was going to be struck, according to the prophet Zechariah, as he was about to take the cup the Father was giving him, the cup of suffering, the cup of God's wrath. And we saw that Jesus, in his perfect humanity, for one moment, rightly, not sinfully, as he contemplated what was before him, recoiled, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. but we saw Jesus in his perfect, spirit-filled humanity wonderfully obeying the Father's will. And we cannot know, as Jesus looked forwards, the horrors that he saw ahead of him before the cross. What I want to say is, if in contemplation, if in looking forwards to Golgotha, to Calvary, Jesus Christ himself wept and sweated drops of blood, if there was that moment of holy recoiling at what was ahead of him, how much deeper is the moment himself when the moment itself when the cup is drunk? Calvary itself. A couple of things have struck me this week just rereading the gospel accounts. And on the run up to Easter, the week before Easter Sunday, it's a good week to do that, to read the different accounts of the cross, of Calvary. What struck me afresh is that this is a mess. This really is a mess of human sin, of suffering, of deceit. Nobody comes off well. Everybody here is caught in some kind of trap, whether it's the chief priests or Pilate or Jesus' disciples. So what we got here is a real mess. And it strikes me as amazing, really. Week by week, I'm telling all of you, look, if you're looking for the golden center of life and purpose and hope, I'm telling you it's found in this absolute travesty, this mess that happens outside Jerusalem years ago. I'm saying that you're going to find it here. It is incredible how different true Christianity is. A suffering Savior, a suffering King. And also, it strikes me that if you were in dizzying and strange times going to have some real ballast for your life, something that is deeply grounding and sobering, a profound joy, if you were going to cultivate that kind of hope, you have to start here at Golgotha, at Calvary. So here we go. We're going to try and plumb some of the depths in this passage, and we're going to go from Matthew's accounts. So up until this point, after midnight, Jesus has been betrayed and arrested. He's been taken to two kind of co-high priests' houses, Annas and Caiaphas. He's been denied by Peter. His disciples have fled. Peter and John have followed at a distance. At dawn, by the Sanhedrin, the decision has been taken to put him to death. There's only one person who is the authority to do that. That's not the Jews themselves. That's the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. He's taken to the governor's house. There's interchange between Pontius Pilate, Jewish king, King Herod, as he's passed between those places, comes back to Pontius Pilate. Before Gabbatha, the seat of judgments, Jesus, the crowds cry out for him to be crucified. A robber, Barabbas, is released instead. Judas, Pontius Pilate, washes his hands of Jesus. He wants to prevent an uproar, an uprising. And so he says, verse 24, I am innocent of this man's blood. This is your responsibility. And with great irony, the people shout out, his blood is on us and our children. And it won't be many years from this that Jerusalem itself is destroyed. They speak better than they know. They reject the Messiah. And so verse 26, Barabbas is released and Jesus is flogged. Now, as I'm sure some of you are aware, that flogging is a Roman flogging. Strands of a whip, pottery and glass in the whip, a brutal, blistering flogging would have killed many people. So Jesus is flogged and is handed over to be crucified. I just want to give you 6 brief soundings from this passage. We're dropping 6 pebbles to see how deep this well, how deep this mine shaft is. First thing, I want you to look at the coronation that Jesus undergoes. So, about 600 soldiers present, probably in the governor's palace. The whole company gather round, and there's this kind of mock coronation. They strip Jesus. They put a scarlet robe on him, scarlet the colour of royalty. They twist a crown of thorns and cruelly jab it on his head. They put a reed, a staff, in his right hand, and they kneel. They mock him. These are Romans mocking the Jewish nation and their pretensions to have a king, but mocking Jesus and his claim, as striking him, taking his clothes off them, and leading him to crucify him. And there's huge irony here, because all the way through Matthew's gospel, Matthew has been saying Jesus is the son of David. Jesus is king. And actually, by taking these robes off him, by striking him with a reed, supposed to be like a king's staff, by getting Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross like one of the king's retinue, there is a coronation happening, but it's a coronation like any other. Matthew is telling us, the gospel writers are telling us, it's here Jesus is king. Yes, he's king at the resurrection. Yes, he's king at his Father's right hand. But here is where Jesus is crowned. A king like no other. A king who suffers. A king who is rejected, spat at. Here is your king. And so the charge is written up. And it's interesting, all 4 gospel writers say it's slightly different. The charge above Jesus, the charge for which he's crucified, he's condemned, reads the King of the Jews. And Matthew says it's Jesus, the King of the Jews. At the start of Matthew's gospel, the angel says to Joseph, "You shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." And Matthew at the cross tells us Jesus, verse 37, Jesus, this is the king like no other, so identified with his people, doing for them what they cannot do for themselves, saving them from their sins. So there's great irony, and Matthew here is showing us something of the meaning of the cross, this condemned king. So there's huge depths here we see in Jesus' coronation. Second thing, there's depths here in the fact of crucifixion himself. After the crowd cry out, "Crucify him," they take him away to crucify him. They force Simon the Cyrene, verse 32, to carry the cross. They offer Jesus wine to drink, kind of a bitter drink. Many people think that it was to kind of prolong the suffering. Jesus refuses it. And it's written so sparsely. They crucified him. They crucified him. It's almost like the writers don't dwell on this because it is so awful. Crucifixion was a form of torturous death that the Romans had borrowed from the Persians. It was so terrible for a Roman citizen. It's unthinkable for a Roman citizen to be crucified. Only slaves were. In the century before the crucifixion of Jesus took place, a Roman writer called Cicero wrote about how awful, how shaming, how terrible crucifixion was. It was purposefully designed to put the victim to the most amount of public shame. It was the Romans saying to the peoples that they subjugated, "You step out of line, this will happen to you." It was shaming, excruciatingly painful. A large kind of piece with a cross piece of wood hung up on it for hours, nails or ropes through the hands and the feet designed so that the victim asphyxiates slowly, terribly painful, terribly shaming. So here we have this coronation of this king that takes place in the most terrible circumstances, crucifixion itself. And it is just a historical fact that Christianity, with a crucified king at the center, took off, like exploded from this moment over the next 100 years across the Roman Empire, which is incredible when you think about it, that Romans who hated this kind of thing actually became believers, and Jewish people who would have hated the fact that this is the Son of God, this is God himself somehow on a cross, many people found this absolutely compelling. This is something not made up. This is a real thing. The king who is crucified, the depths of his coronation, the fact of his crucifixion. We've seen the charge against him, the King of the Jews. Let's see the contempt that Jesus suffers. Look at verse 38. 2 rebels crucified with him. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads. Now, what Matthew is writing here is just dripping with Old Testament references. It's amazing. I read to you from the start of the book of Lamentations. The book of Lamentations describes the destruction of Jerusalem at the time of exile at the hands of the Babylonians. What is amazing in the book of Lamentations is in Lamentations 1 and Lamentations 2, the enemies of Jerusalem are described as passing by. All you who pass by, and they wag their heads at the destruction of Jerusalem. Here we have Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and those who pass by wag their heads. Matthew is telling us here we have a moment of judgments, of exile, of shame, of suffering, and they mock. They say, save yourself, come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. The chief priests, the teachers of the law, the elders mock as well. He saved others, but he can't save himself, ridiculing his claim to be king. And they say, let him come down from the cross and we will believe. If he trusts in God, let him rescue him if he wants him. Now here's the great irony. They say, we'll believe if he comes down from the cross, save himself. As the hymn goes, himself he could not save. In not saving himself, Jesus is saving his people from their sins. Even the rebels who are with him, crucified with him. So here we have depths. This is where I want to get to, is the darkness and the cry. Verse 45 and verse 46. Now, Mark tells us that it was the third hour that Jesus was crucified. So we put that probably at about mid-morning. John's Gospel, John tells us that it was the 6th hour that Jesus was charged and condemned to death by Pilate. There's no contradiction there. The Jewish day put into 4 segments. So they're talking largely about the same period of time. Mid-morning, about 10 o'clock, 10:30, Jesus on the cross. And then it's the 6th hour, something happens at noon, midday. There's this darkness that comes upon the land, all the lands. It's not the right time of year for at that moment for an eclipse. So there's this supernatural darkness. Darkness in the Old Testament is a sign of the day of the Lord, God's judgments. Something is happening in the darkness. There is a judgment that is happening. And then at 3:00 in the afternoon, at the kind of epicenter of the darkness, Jesus cries out from Psalm 22, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? If we're going to drop a coin or a pebble into Calvary and to find the depths of it, this is the verse to look at. This is the verse to look at. Jesus is quoting from one of the Psalms where David himself is undergoing a moment of suffering and is almost estranged from God, doesn't know where God is, crying out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? So in the darkness, in some way here, Jesus is abandoned and forsaken by God. Now, one way of charting our way through Calvary and what happened there are the 7 things that Jesus said on the cross. At the first part of the crucifixion, Jesus says to those who are crucifying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. He says to a thief, today you will be with me in paradise. In John's Gospel, we see him saying to his beloved disciple, John and his mother, behold your mother, your son, giving Mary into John's hands. So those are the first 3 sayings. You get the last 3 sayings on the cross. You get Jesus saying, I thirst, his extreme suffering. You get Jesus saying, it is finished. You get Jesus saying, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. But the saying in the middle, the 4th saying, is my God, why have you forsaken me? Imagine a large U shape, like a cavern, a valley. If you like it, you would have the first 3 sayings, and then the second 3 sayings in the cross going up triumph. But the one in the middle, my God, why have you forsaken me, is the absolute cry of dereliction. There, as people have pointed out, the first saying, Father, forgive them. The last saying, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. The one in the middle, my God, no longer Jesus conscious of God as his Father, suffering as a righteous sufferer. So great is the sense of the wrath of God against sin, of the judgment, of the darkness, of the horror that he is facing, of the cup that he is drinking, as a believer reaching out to God, but a cry of real abandonment. We've said, haven't we, that Jesus' life was this descending kind of dip towards the cross, always going down. And even in the last week of Jesus' life, there's a series of kind of steps towards the cross. What I want you to see, the cross itself, those 3 hours in the darkness, was a descent. A descent, if you like, into hell. What it is like to be abandoned, forsaken, to face the judgments of God itself. Let me read to you from a writer about this. It's worth dwelling on. Was Golgotha more horrible than Christ had imagined it would be when he was in Gethsemane? For a moment, seeming to lose his awareness of the Father, terror absorbed all his conscious faculties, and the great cry arose from the depths of his being. Tormented, bewildered, finding himself, as it were, in hell without belonging there, Christ strained for heaven, but was transfixed, as it were, by the divine condemnation he was undergoing. Only he could have stood up to this soul-destroying paradox without total despair. On the cross, he sank into man's hell of judgment to break its power. Dying on the cross, forsaken by his Father, it was damnation. But damnation taking lovingly. And we just drop the coin, drop the pebble, and we don't hear it reach the bottom in terms of Christ's sufferings here. It is incredible. My God, why have you forsaken me? So here we have the Son of God, who has undergone depths of suffering that you and I cannot understand. And the wonderful thing about the gospel is we have a God who in Christ has suffered. So if you have suffered and you can't see the end of your worst day or your worst moments, here you have a God who meets you in that, and that there is hope even in the middle of it. But what Jesus has won for us is not simply sympathy. It's not just the fact that Jesus says, I sympathize with you. What Jesus has won for us is pardon and immunity. That Jesus faces a judgment that we deserve because we don't have to. I met a lady who lived in Australia. She lived on the side of the bush, and in the summer season in Australia, huge wildfires would sweep across the bush. And when there was a wildfire coming in the distance, the fire services would come. There would be a few miles off, and this is the way they would protect the house. How they would protect our house is this. They would go out in her front garden and in the area of bush outside the houses, and they would start a fire themselves. And they would burn a large section of ground around. We've seen a lot of wildfires recently, haven't we? Feels like a day doesn't go by and you don't see a fire up in the hills at the moment. Well, they do that because when the bushfire sweeps towards them, it would stop meters away from the houses because fire can't go where the ground has already been burnt. The ground has already been burnt, and so the fire can't go there. And this is what the gospel is, that you and I, as sinners in this world, deserve the judgment of God. We deserve the outer darkness. And Jesus Christ comes, lives the life you and I haven't lived, dies this death of profound suffering and abandonment by the Father. And that's our death. He dies in our place for us. So that if we're trusting in Christ, the fire can't go where the ground has already been burnt. We are safe. What Jesus wins for us is not just sympathy. He wins immunity, pardon, no condemnation. My God, why have you forsaken me? The cry in the darkness. And no wonder when Jesus dies and gives up his spirit, the ground shakes. Creation gives its witness. Something awesome is happening. Something incredible. The whole creation giving witness as we sing. Now the daylight flees. Now the ground beneath quakes as its maker bows his head. Jesus cries out. And the centurion looking on say, surely this was the Son of God. Surely this one is King. There are depths here. There are depths. Here's my question. Is just Jesus your King? Do you love him? Because the amazing thing is here, Jesus has done something that nobody else could have done. In the darkness, facing a horror that would have sent you and I insane, Jesus, in dependence on the Spirit, even trusting in his Father, even in the darkness, Jesus wins on the cross, keeps going, endures wonderfully and bravely and lovingly. There's nobody like this. There's nobody like Jesus Christ. Nobody with his character. Nobody with his steadfastness. Nobody has ever done something like this. So you and I, when we see the depths, our legs need to buckle. And we need to say, surely this is the Son of God. To love him, trust him, and worship him. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain. We're going to sing together before we come.